There we are. Welcome, everyone. This is still the Richland Park Library Writers Meetup, but today is a special day. We are doing a workshop / conversation with Melissa. Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
So I'm going to read her bio really quickly, and then we'll kick off. So I have a handful of questions. We'll go through those, and then we'll just open it up to the group. Very casual, but we still want to keep, sorry, I'm looking at something. Keep it, respectful and everything as we would in the normal meetups. But if you worry you're going to forget your question, just throw it in the chat and I'll just make sure to keep watch of that. Now I knew they were going to do this. Okay, someone's coming. Okay, bio, boom. Melissa is a women's fiction, romance, and suspense writer, represented by Ariana Phillips of the Jean V. Nager Literary Agency in New York. Y'all probably saw that part when I sent the email out, but you may not know that her professional background is actually in medicine. And she spent several years doing that before turning to her love of writing and seeking a traditional publishing career. So again, welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for that introduction. It makes me feel so special.
You're welcome. I was worried I would, my allergies would show and I'd mess up your last name. That's why I just said Melissa. So, yay. Okay. So let's kick off. First question. Tell us where my questions are. Tell us what your publishing experience was prior to this and kind of how you got started.
Okay, so publishing before this was pretty much nothing. I did not have a big background when I started querying. Now my very first short story was published by Onyx, but that was when Etched Onyx magazine was just starting out. It was a baby company and didn't have a lot of cred behind it. Now, Onyx is rolling pretty well. But at the time, that really wasn't anything to get too excited over. So I didn't really have much of a publishing background, nothing to speak of. So I did put that in my query letter, but now I, work with Onyx and I don't feel like that would really be something I put in there anyway. So yeah, I don't think it matters to a lot of agents on the smaller side of things, unless you have a big history in bigger places, bigger magazines for them to pay attention to. I think if you have a good sampling of people accepting your work and that can vouch for, this is people enjoy this work and you're pretty much validated by those short stories or essays, then I think somebody might pay attention. But otherwise, if it's smaller or, I don't think they care that much.
Okay. So if I followed your blog journey correctly, in terms of like documenting this process, you had 2 different novels that you were working on. So how did you decide which one you wanted to pitch first? And then, yeah.
Well, my first novel has kind of been set aside. So I had 3 novels and I pitched all 3. The first one was young adult, so I stopped pitching that. But I learned a lot when I pitched those. I learned how not to do things. When I first started this, I thought I had this preconceived notion that I could write a book and I could publish it. I was like, I'm just going to find out how to do it. I'm going to publish it. Well, it turns out it is just not that way. There's a whole lot of work to it. So I wrote the psychological thriller young adult book, set it aside, and then I wrote 2 more. And I pitched my second one, which was psychological suspense. And again, I did not know how to pitch at that time. I didn't do a good job. It was not an effective pitch. It was rushed. I was excited to get it out there. And I didn't have a good foundation for the book. One thing that querying and doing your synopsis and all that stuff can do for you is to show you holes in your work. Because if you can't write what your book is about in a long blurb, short blurb, then your book is not publishable, in my opinion. Once you can put it out there and when you're writing it, it kind of exposes those flaws. So that helped me to expose the flaws that I didn't have a book that was going to ever get me out there with the second one. I still had some queries out there when I started querying my third novel, which was the women's fiction novel. So I didn't really query at the same time, but they did overlap a little bit. But I pretty much closed the book on that second one. Querying is so much work if you're doing it right. You know, you're researching agents, you're tailoring your materials to the agent, and you're figuring out what to say to make sure the agent feels special. All of that takes so much work. I couldn't imagine doing that, you know, two at the same time. So no, it was pretty much one at a time for me. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and a couple other questions, but you're all good.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say.
How did you, what were you looking for when you were looking for your agents and creating the list of who you would actually pitch? What were you looking for?
That took me a while to get to. And so some of that was, I started out, like I said, really excited, and I just wanted an agent. And I think I would have said yes a long time ago to anybody who said, hey, I will be your agent. And I would just be like, for sure, let's do this thing. But I realized that that's not really the best approach as I continued on. And I learned more. I listened to more people who had agents, who were going after agents, or who had gotten an agent and realized that this agent wasn't really for them. So when I finally got to a good place in my querying process, it was with knowledge of multiple things. One was I knew where my book sat on the shelf. Like I knew what other books were comparison titles. I think that's so important. If you know where your book sets, you know, you have a good idea of how an agent can sell your work, because that's what they're looking for. If you don't know what you've got and you don't know who your audience is, you become less appealing to the agent. So I knew who my audience was. I knew books that were similar. I knew what the agent was representing. I have seen a lot of agent interviews where they say, you're getting denied for queries because you are pitching to the wrong person. You need to make sure that the agent is the right agent for your work. If you're writing women's fiction, they need to represent women's fiction, not romance, you know, for example. So that was a big thing, something that I learned along the way. I used a spreadsheet and I acquired my agent list from several different places. And one, I'm going to throw in the chat, a resource that I use is Jane Friedman. If you guys are wanting to publish, Jane Friedman is awesome. Whoops, I just opened it instead of copying it. JaneFriedman.com. She tells you basically how to do everything, and she does it really well. Everything is there. Put it in the chat. So she recommends a few, and that's where I started off. And Query Tracker was my main jam because it was free. They have a free option, and I like free. I did not want to put a lot. I didn't want to invest a lot. I didn't know if I was going to make it. I mean, I still don't, but I didn't want to put a whole lot in. And so Query Tracker was great. There were a lot of agents on that list, but Publishers Marketplace, if you're willing to pay, is a really good one. Their agent profiles, it's a professional one. There is a paid version of Query Tracker too. And then Duotrope is another one that you can pay for. Twitter, manuscript wish lists on Twitter is another good place for you to find agents. And I used that. When the pitch fests were going on, you can look and see what agents are liking different things. And the agents tell you what they're looking for. So that's exciting. List of conferences. I didn't necessarily go to a ton of conferences, but I would look up the ones. When I was doing Thriller, I looked up Thriller Fest. I looked at who was on the panels, who was there, and what they were looking for. So I would get my list from that. And then my favorite books, the books that were similar to my books, whatever that agent was, I would Google them. And I mean, that author was. I would Google them, find out who their agent was or their editor, and go with similar titles. So that's kind of you can get a full list by Publishers Marketplace, Query Tracker, Duotrope, but you can also kind of find by rabbit holing, by finding an agent that way. Once you find somebody who's like yours, then you look at who else they represent and you start going down that path. So each book can take you in a different way. So I created that spreadsheet, and then I would start checking them off. What else do I want to say on that? Yeah, make sure they're representing what you write, know who their clients are. And then I started looking, I got a little picky when I was looking at the agents too, who they did represent and what kind of deals that they were able to put together. Because you can find a newbie agent who doesn't know what they're doing, and they're maybe even pitching to the wrong editors. And I'd never thought about that. I just thought agent, they know what they're doing, and that's not necessarily true. I think you have to look and make sure that the agency is reputable, that the agent is reputable, and that they know what they're doing. They can be new, but they should be in an agency that's established. I think if you can do anything, you can go with somebody new, but you take a risk, I think. So I didn't want to take that risk. It's such a long, hard process that I wanted to have somebody who I knew could take my work and know what to do with it, because that's why I wanted an agent. I don't really know how to fight for myself and advocate for myself as an author, and an agent does. They're your go-between for that publisher. So that was my process, and that's how I found my list, and that's how I picked who was on it.
Okay, cool. So what was your timeline like? Because you had initially was pitching the psychological suspense, and then you
Yes.
decided to do the women's fiction. So kind of were you writing the women's fiction novel as you were pitching the suspense, or kind of what was the timeline between deciding, okay, now I'm ready to pitch the women's fiction one?
Yeah, that is hazy for me. The timeline is really hazy because I can't remember. I went back and forth on both of those novels several times. So when Consumed was, when I thought it was done and people were reading it, I was writing The False Flat, so my women's fiction novel. I was writing that novel. And then I got those edits back and from Consumed and sent out the women's fiction novel. So people were reading that. I was editing Consumed. And I thought, well, this needs one more round. So it was kind of a back and forth of beta readers and editing. So I don't know how long, but I knew when I had edited it to the best that I could. And I think that you edit your work as you take it as far as you can before you let somebody else's eyes see it, because then you get the most bang for your buck. People will correct the small things that you just didn't take the time to correct, and then you lose out possibly on something. So you get it as good as you can get it. Now, I will say, as I'm thinking about this, that a lot of people who get agents have had an editor, a developmental editor, take a look at their work, or a copy editor before they ever get there. I watched a presentation that said that over 50% of people who get an agent have had their work edited by an editor, an honest to goodness editor that they paid for before they ever get there, because agents these days have so many works that they have to look at, and yours has to stand out. So if your query doesn't stand out, if your manuscript, the first 5 or 25 pages that they're looking at, doesn't stand out, you're shooting yourself in the foot. The pool is just too big. So you have to really make sure that you're ready and don't go. I made that mistake, which is why I queried so many times on both of my first 2 novels before I ever got an agent, because I did so many things wrong. And if you just wait and you take your time, you have a much better chance, because once you send to an agent that you really like, it's very hard to have a second chance unless you drastically change your manuscript and they've already said no. You pretty much don't submit again to that same agent. So you want to put your best foot forward, and that takes time. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is having patience. That was a tough thing for me to accept, because like I said, was really excited. But back to the timeline question, once I edited it, had people read it, I edited it again. Depending upon what the beta reader said, I either would go for another round of editing and beta reading, or I was like, okay, I feel like I fixed this. I can't remember what I did on the false flat. I'm pretty sure I went through a couple of rounds of beta reading and editing before I said, okay, this is ready to go out. So that was several months. Now, if I knew what I knew now, I could, and I got my most recent manuscript that's ready. My agent just read it and gave me feedback on it. I was able to write it, edit it, beta read, edit again within a period of 6 months. So that was way different. Before it took me years to kind of gather the process, but now I'm in a space where I know what I'm doing better. Now that was when I had the agent, but I would have been ready to query that one within 6 months had I not had the agent to just give it to. So that was my process.
So you have this list of all the agents you want to reach out to. How many did you pitch to at a time?
Oh, that's a really good question. In the beginning, I would pitch to like 15 or 20 at a time. When I became more educated and listened to people who knew what they were talking about, they recommend sending in batches of 5. The reason for that is that you might get feedback from these agents. And if they look at your work and they don't request pages, but they say, I wasn't pulled in by your first 5 pages, or I didn't really understand what your book was about based on your query, then you know that you need to fix it before you go out with another set of submissions. So any information that you can gather is great. Now, a lot of times you won't hear back, but I think batches of 5 are great. When I started doing it again later, that's what I did.
Okay, so I know that you pitched on Twitter.
Yes.
You've done cold email querying. And did you
Yep.
do like face-to-face virtual conference kind of
Yes,
thing as well? Okay.
I
So
did.
of those, that variety of querying types, kind of what did you learn from each one? Were like the pros and cons you experienced?
Yes, I forgot about the Twitter pitching. I'm glad you said that. That was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I didn't get many bites with that. I did get a few requests, but nothing really came of that. That was a great way to hone the pitch. Being able to write what your book is about in that many characters of a Twitter pitch is fantastic. Like that helps you hone in. And I have a formula for now of what goes in those pitches that catches the agent's eye. And so that was great. And being able to having that skill, I did a women's fiction pitch that was similar to that, but it was within the Women's Fiction Writing Association, where you would write, I don't remember how many characters it was, but it was very short. And you did your first 500 words. That was a great experience for me. I think anytime you can put your work out there and write it in a concise way, you learn and you grow. I didn't gain an agent from doing the Twitter thing, but I gained a lot of experience. It was worthwhile for me. Doing cold querying, that's where still most people get their agent. That's by far how people get their agent is cold querying. It just works. But I actually did not get my agent from cold querying. I went to, and I highly recommend this, Writers' Day workshops that Brian Clems kind of runs that. So you can remember that name, but Writers' Day workshops is a conference for writers that agents, a lot of agents will like call into, and they will be available for you to pitch in person. They did through COVID, a lot of things turned online. So I did an online conference where everything was online, but You would buy a spot, 10 minutes with an agent, and you were able to orally pitch your work. They accepted or rejected you right there on the spot. Then you had whatever time was left to ask questions. And so I thought, I'm going to do this because I was nervous to pitch my work. I would blubber around when somebody would be like, what is your book about? I'd be like, well, I would want to talk 20 minutes about what my book was about. And you may not even really know what it was about after that 20 minutes. So I crafted a pitch to do it in person. And then I was able to have that person, a true agent, tell me whether it was any good. That experience was one of the best experiences of my whole authoring journey, is being able to talk to an agent in person. I did four pitches, 4 agents. I did 2 at first. I signed up for 2. I had so much fun. I did 2 more. Every single agent asked me for more. And that doesn't, you get past the slush pile when you do that. And that was the first time I'd ever paid for a conference, best money I ever spent. But that is how I met my agent. She asked me for the first 3 chapters of my novel. I sent it to her. She was like, okay, I've got to see more. She requested the full. And then this kind of leads into the revise and resubmit. So I don't want to go off topic. I guess I'll go off topic a little bit here. Is she did not just accept me. She read my novel, and then she sent me this email, and she said, I loved your book, but I think for it to be publishable out there in today's marketplace, this is what I think you should do. She sent me a long list of stuff, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. So that was the revise and resubmit. I had no guarantee that she was going to be my agent after I spent all this time revising, but that was what I was here for, to put the work in. So I did it. I revised, and her feedback was excellent. I did everything. I think that was partly a test to see how well we would work together. I sent her my new manuscript. A month later, she sent me an email and said, I finished your manuscript. Let's set up a Zoom meeting. I was convinced that she was going to tell me, I just wanted to tell you in person that your revisions were terrible. This novel is garbage and you need to stop writing. I was just convinced. I told my husband, I was like, she's telling me in person because we've already had this whole thing that it's over for me. And because I didn't believe that she was going to offer me representation. And then she got on, she started talking about the novel, and I was like, oh my goodness, she wants me to do more edits. It's over. Then she said, and I'd like to offer you representation. I told her right there, I was like, hold on a minute, just hold on. I mean, this is a professional woman. I had to take a minute. I started squealing in front of her, and I asked her, are you for serious? And that was fantastic. But I got that through that whole experience and my agent through doing Writer's Day workshops and meeting the agent in person. I'm convinced that made a difference. They're able to put a face and a personality to something that's normally kind of on the dry side. They read words all the time. If you can get in front of somebody virtually or in person, I highly recommend that you do it. It was a huge game changer for me. And I've talked other people into doing it, and they've had great experiences. A women's fiction writer who I connected with recently, I talked her into doing exactly the same workshop that I did. She's in Alaska, but she did, I think, it wasn't exactly the same because I did a Tennessee one, but you don't have to be in Tennessee. You can do a Chicago one and be wherever if it's online. And she pitched and got some requests, but one agent told her that she didn't represent the novel that this woman was pitching, but she enjoyed the conversation so much that she sent a follow-up email the next day and said, I just wanted to tell you I enjoyed talking with you and I wish that we could work together. If you have anything else in the future, send it to me. And I was like, that is why you do it in person. I think that is just fantastic. I know there are questions that are coming in the chat, and I'm kind of ignoring those because I think we're going to get to them later, right?
Yeah, we are. I'm watching it. You're good.
Okay.
I just want to say you just like terrified all the introverts on the call with this.
I'm an introvert. I am an introvert. I'm not shy though, but I am an introvert. And I mean, I did a presentation, I recorded it. You can't hear what the agent says to me because I was wearing headphones and I didn't tell her that I was recording her, but I did record my presentation. So if anybody's like, I can't do this, you can see exactly what I said and how I pitched my novel. I was excited though, because that was an opportunity and I want this. So I was excited to meet them face to face and convince them that they wanted my novel. And so when you have that opportunity, it's a lot of fun. No, it's nothing to be scared of. These people are agents, but they're people and they don't get paid unless you get paid. So like, and you know, they work for you, you work as a team, and they are just people looking for something good. And if you've got something good, why should you be worried? Why should you be worried? That is no fear. You just have to let that go and put yourself out there.
Okay, so stepping back just a second, because you touched on a
Yes.
couple of things that we'll get to, but what kind of reception did you get from I know you said nothing came from Twitter, but as far as like, requests for chapters or, rejections or anything like that, what was that looking like before you actually found the woman who ultimately represented you?
When I first started, I queried probably on my first novel, probably 70 agents before I stopped and realized I was doing something wrong. I still was doing it wrong the second time. I queried a lot. I don't remember how many I queried. I think I got one request, maybe two, but it was pretty much crickets. When I finally realized what belonged in a query letter and I did it right, I started getting lots of requests. I got 8 to 10 requests for fulls. And in my pitch event that I did with the women's fiction, I was the second highest of everybody, of all the contestants who were there. Contestants, that sounds like a game show. And I don't say that to toot my own horn. I say that over knowledge of what to put in the query. I finally realized, and when I put the right things in, I got response. And I can tell you what those things are, what I think should be in your query later too. But if you have a query letter that's well done, you should be getting requests. If you're not getting requests, it's not always the case, but it's probably something's wrong with your query letter. It's possible that it's the first 5 pages, but if your query letter isn't up to snuff, they're not going to ever make it to those 5 pages, even though they've asked for them and they've included it. The query is what snags them, and it's that blurb, your comp titles, that you know where it belongs on the shelf and that you know what your book is about. And if you know what your book is about and you have the right things in there, you will get requests. You should be getting requests.
What no, you did, you're good. So what made you keep going after, initially you say you were getting crickets and there was a lot of rejections, and you assume that most of that was your fault, but in some cases it may have just been, they're representing enough writers at the time or whatever other excuse. But
Yeah.
what kind of kept you going? Because like you said, it's a very long process. There's a lot of research and things that goes into it.
It's a very demoralizing process. I think that there were a lot of times in the process I felt like I wasn't good enough and I wasn't going to cut it and I was going to give up. I was really close to getting up before I got my agent. I had done this for so long. Like, I am a very determined person, and I think you have to go back to why you're doing this. I think that's one of the biggest questions that an author has to ask themselves is, why are you writing and what do you want? Like, what are your goals and why are you doing this? Because when you know those things, it becomes easier to get past the obstacles that you face, because you're going to face a lot. And when I realized that rejection was part of the process, that's when I took every rejection that I got, and I got a lot, and I let that rejection fuel me. I let that rejection be a stepping stone. I learned from the rejection whatever I could learn from it. I learned from, I would use whatever in some of the rejections, there's nothing you can gain. It's like, this isn't for me, and you don't have anything to go by. And those probably hurt the worst, because you're like, well, I'm a loser and there's nothing I can do here. But that's not the case. There are so many reasons why you might be rejected, even when you do have a good query letter. Because even though you might have a good query letter and you might have a fantastic manuscript, there will still be rejection. And knowing that that's part of the process, not dwelling on the negative, and letting yourself focus on the positives. There were enough positive experiences along the writing journey that kept me going, that I made myself focus on. An agent would say, oh, you're a beautiful writer, or if you have anything else, send it to me. This is just not for me. It was like, there were little things along the way. Or the writers group, like, you are a good writer. You guys were big motivators for me. And like, you have a good manuscript. What people say to you can kind of fuel you, or kind of dash your flame, put a wet blanket over your flame. But I think if you have that fire and you have the motivation, you know your reason why, you keep going, and you realize that, I can't say this enough, that you realize rejection is part of the process, and that you don't internalize it so much to think, oh, I'm a bad writer, or I'm never going to hack it. It's just the persistence in using it to fuel you forward. And knowing that it's going to take a long time. Like, if you don't want it bad enough, you're not going to. Right now I'm in a time in my life where I'm not going back into medicine. And I thought, well, if I give up, what else am I going to do? I love writing. I've got the time investment. Had I been in a different place in my life, I might not have thought it was worth enough to keep going. So I think you have to answer that question for yourself, and what you're willing to put yourself through. I was willing to put myself through a lot to get what I wanted.
Okay. I'm gonna touch on one of the questions in the chat really quick. You cited that statistic about 50% of agents, or 50% of writers who got an agent had it professionally edited. Did you have yours professionally edited before you got your agent?
That's a great question. As I mentioned earlier, I am cheap, I guess. I don't know if cheap is the right word. I just don't want to spend money on something that might fail. And I know you in this kind of business, sometimes you have to like invest in yourself. I just have a hard time mentally investing in something I'm not sure is going to make a return. So I just spent my time, and I did not get an editor. I talked to an editor, and I was like, yeah, I'm going with her. Then she gave me her fee. I was like, I am not going with her. I will do this myself. Thank you very much. So that was when I changed hats. So when I realized how much a good editor is, it's like, yeah, let me try this. Let me see what I can do here one more time. I started researching what an editor looks for in a manuscript. I started looking at my manuscript, not like it was mine, but like it was somebody else's. That's really hard to do, and I didn't do it completely well. But I developmentally edited my own work, and I used other writers who were solid. Like you guys were a part of that, but also I had a smaller writing group, and there is one woman who is absolutely amazing. She should be an editor, and she was just part of the writing group, and it was fantastic. So if you have quality people around you, I think you can get away with not having your manuscript edited professionally by the writers around. That's what I did. And it probably would have been easier for me. And then maybe I would have cut my time down and learned more had I gone that way. But it was a personal choice. Just, I didn't want to spend that kind of money.
Okay, so a couple more general questions, and then we'll get into the agent specific questions. But given all of that that you went through,
Yes.
Looking back now, based on what you've experienced, what you've learned, would you say that it was worth it? continuing to, keep pitching?
Yes. Yes, it was worth it. I will say that one thing that I did learn in this process is just because you have an agent doesn't mean you're going to get published with one of the big 5 publishing companies. I think that was one of the hardest pills that I had to swallow, and that I didn't think about. I had my blinders on. I wanted the agent. I didn't really think a whole lot past that. I knew I wanted to be traditionally published, but I thought I just have to get an agent that's a quality agent. So I was really looking at that. But then I realized that when she started pitching my manuscript to editors at big publishing houses, I realized that this, and when I talked to her, and she asked me the question, whatever questions I had questions because I researched that for this interview, even though I thought she was going to tell me, reject me to my face. I thought on the slight chance that she does offer me representation, I need to be prepared. So I recommend being prepared for anything you do. Anytime you get in front of somebody, be prepared. And then that takes care of those nerves if you're prepared. I wrote out what I wanted to say. I put it on the screen. And my pitch, I read that. So just so you know, I love the online thing because I actually read that, but I read it with, I guess, some expression, so they couldn't really tell that I was just blatantly reading it. But anyway, what was I saying? Was it worth it? I went off topic here, but
You're fine.
yeah, it was definitely. Is that the question that we're on?
You were
Is
talking
it
about how the publishers weren't getting the 5 publishing houses weren't necessarily picking it up.
Right. It's just not a guarantee. So that was something that I had to realize and I had to become okay with. But I think still you have to decide what path is right for you. And an agent path doesn't necessarily guarantee you publication. An agent path isn't necessarily the right path for everyone. Some people are very successful self-publishing. So it just depends. But you have to be willing to put the work in at any time. But the highs I've experienced from this have been definitely worth it. And I'm still hoping that I will still achieve the end result. So I've been at the point where I was ready to give up. And then I got to that, next spot where having that Zoom meeting with her and her saying, I want to offer you representation, getting off of that call, I spent a long time just dancing around. That was so worth it. That was such a fun moment for me. And you celebrate those wins along the way. That was a big win, but celebrating the small wins along the way helped sustain me and kept the whole process of worth kind of in the hand, if that makes sense.
No, it did. You're good. And that's a good segue as we talk a little bit more about your experience with your agent. So kind of tell us where you are now with the book. Is it with editors? Are y'all still actually editing it, or where are you now with the book?
Yes, it's what's called on submission. So it's been on submission for a while. The manuscript that got me the agent was the 3rd novel that I wrote. So that's something else, you may not get an agent with the very first novel that you write. So we are on submission with that and waiting to hear back from editors. And it takes a very long time to hear back. Sometimes you hear with 24 to 48 hours. And I've heard of people getting book deals, like bidding wars within a week or two. And so that was when I heard about that, I thought, oh, the fact that hasn't happened to me, I'm not going anywhere. But the most common thing to happen is for an editor to take a very long time to get back to you. Sometimes it can be over a year before you know whether that manuscript is going to be pulled from submission. Since that time, I figured balls are in the air. I haven't been fully rejected from editors. I wrote another novel. I sent it to her. She read it, gave me edits back. So I'm about to start those edits. And then I went back to that second novel that I put aside. I listened to negative feedback and let that, I simmered on the negative feedback and I let that influence me to put that novel away. I pulled it back out and I'm about to finish that and send that one to her. So right now, and then I have another novel that I'm going to be editing after these other two. So I have 4 novels going at this moment, one on submission, and one that's been read by my agent and that I'm going to edit, and then one that I'm editing on my own before that I'm about to give to her, and then one that's way in the back, but still coming up. So it's a bunch of possibility there. Now that I have the agent, even if she doesn't sell this first manuscript, she thinks she can sell it or she wouldn't have taken me on, but it's still a possibility that it won't sell. I have something else to give her, and I have something else after that. So it doesn't just end there, but it's a longer process than I thought it might have been.
That's good. A related question in the chat was, do you get regular reports from your agent about which editors that she's tried, and what is that experience like?
Yes, she asked me my preferences. Some authors like to batch their feedback, or I can get them whenever they come in. And I just told her I just want it whenever they come in. So I think every agent is different, but she gave me the option, and anytime she receives any sort of information, she sends me an update. And if she's going to send out to any new editors, she gives me that update. So she's great. And I think any agent should, if they don't automatically give you that update, you can just ask them and they will. And they'll tell you, who they're submitting to, so you can know what editor it is. Don't be afraid to ask. I think I've been afraid to ask and afraid to question in a lot of cases, but I realized that this is a business. I think one of the biggest things that authors don't realize is this is a creative space. This is a creative work that you're putting out there, and it's your baby. But when you start getting into this aspect of wanting to get your book published traditionally or what have you, that you have to look at your book as a product, and everything that you do around it as a business. I think that's how one author who owns her own company but also is traditionally published, she said that things changed for her when she realized that she had to start looking at this whole process as a business. It is that way. Half of it is creative delights, the other half is a hard grind product. So I think that is big. But yes, she stays in contact with me along the way.
Now, is she subbing to multiple editors at a time, or?
Yes, she has. I think everybody does a different amount of time, a different amount of editors. I'm not sure how that varies, but it's a handful every time. And you wait it's like our querying. When we query the agent, we do it in batches. The agent is doing the same thing to the editors.
Okay. You kind of touched on it a little bit, other writing projects that you're working on. So I'll come back to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit as well, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Kind of tell us some of those things you've learned about yourself as a writer during this entire process, from initially pitching to now having an agent, and the agent querying editors. What have you learned about yourself?
About myself
as a writer?
As a writer, I have learned, I guess this is less about myself, but more of the more you read, the more you write, the more you critique, the more you spend time around any sort of written word, or I love audiobooks too, you get better. And I thought I was creating the best manuscript, and I realized there was room for improvement. So that was a huge thing that I learned over time, that first manuscript I put out there, when I go back and read it, I'm like, whoa, I have grown so much as a writer, and I don't really feel like I've done that much. I've just written a lot more. I've read a lot more. I've critiqued a lot more. And just immersing yourself if you want something. I use my example of, if you have a relationship with somebody, if you want to have a good relationship with somebody, you spend time with them, right? You spend time, you get to know them. You know what they like, you know how to plan things. It's the same thing with any sort of business endeavor like this. or goal, I think. If you want something, you better get to know about it. You learn everything you can about it. You spend time with it. So if you want to be published, spend time getting with people who are doing the same thing. Go to conferences if you can. Read a lot. Those were things that that were huge for me along the way, that grew me, and I didn't even know I was growing. I didn't even feel like I was growing, but I was, looking back at different manuscripts. And that's how I became able to semi-developmentally edit my own novel, was because of that experience and listening to editors and how they look at manuscripts, because it's different than how we look at manuscripts, and editing other people's work. I love doing that because it teaches me a lot, and listening to other people edit work. So yeah, those were huge things I learned about myself. I also learned that I'm stronger than I think I am. Like I said, it's a very hard process. It's long. And I think that you can do this. This could sound cheesy, but I really don't care. I believe it. You can do anything. If you want it bad enough, you will do what it takes. And that has been fun for me, watching myself want to give up at times, but pushing through. That's the only reason I got an agent, you guys, is because of my dedication and persistence in doing it. If you don't pursue it fully, it's going to take you a lot longer. And even when you do pursue it fully, it still takes a long time, but you aren't going to get it unless you try, unless you go for it. And you don't get anything you don't ask for. Those are kinds of things, you reach for the stars. You go and you say, I can talk to this agent face to face. I will do this. It's a mindset. I think that was a big thing for me in learning about that along the way.
Okay.
This is fun.
Someone wants to know what kind of books you've read on writing, like craft books.
One of my favorites, and everybody's favorite, is On Writing by Stephen King. I listened to his audiobook on that one. He reads it himself. I love it. I looked at the story grid method. I didn't read the book, but I just kept hearing over and over again how you had to have tent poles and, like this happening at this percent in the novel. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want structure in my life. I found out that structure was actually pretty good. That is another thing that I learned, is plotting the novel. I was a pantser, and when I actually plotted, things went better for me. I don't have anything against pantsing. A lot of people pants. You find out a whole lot. I still pants some, but learning different structures kind of helps you understand what readers are looking for, genre expectations, things like that. Save the Cat Writes a Novel was something that I looked at, the story grid method. I looked at, and then for my romance, I can't remember. I've got the book somewhere around here. I can't remember what it's called right now, but I did look at a couple of craft books. And then the Emotion Thesaurus, that's sitting on my desk right now, so I'll throw that out there. It helps you craft when you're trying to, instead of just like he stared off into the distance, or you're trying to capture an emotion of a character. That Emotion Thesaurus can give you, instead of saying he felt angry, you just show the character being angry, and that can kind of trigger you to write that and show it instead of tell it. So that's another one that's sitting here. I don't have a patience to read a lot of the writing resources, but those are the ones that that I would recommend. I would also recommend, if you're interested in getting published, finding an agent, or just even if you're not looking for an agent, Bookends Literary. I absolutely love the woman who, I'm going to copy this link and put it in the chat. This is a YouTube channel. that has invaluable information. In it, they tell you, I may have sent that other link not to everyone too. But anyway, that's the YouTube channel that they go through what agents are looking for, their agents themselves, what should be in a query letter. I highly recommend watching their videos. They're succinct. Them and janefriedman.com, two great resources for the query. And then they will also tell you like books, I think, to look at, or resources, writing resources to use.
Okay. You started touching on this a little bit earlier, but someone asked, what elements do you think are the most important to include in a query letter?
Oh, I love that. Who the protagonist is, what makes them unique. That's really important. What their motivation is. So what pushes them to change, what their goal or their desire is, what do they want? If your character doesn't know what they want, you don't have a story that's going to catch an agent's eye. You might have an entertaining story, but this is like catching an agent. How are they going to get what they want? So kind of story setup. I think that's very important. What stands in their way of getting what they want, that resistance, and then along with that core conflict are the stakes. You need to have stakes in your query. What happens if they don't get what they want? That's really important. And then throwing in there the essential relationships, who helps the character get from A to B. That's, I think, probably less needed than the other ones, but that is that like that those needed elements, that formula, which is not really a formula, but just putting those aspects into your pitch, changed my pitch from getting no requests to getting lots of requests. That was it. I just followed what agents said they wanted. And then I was like, wow, that actually, they do want this. It works. You can't be the outlier. I mean, some people can put questions in their query. They tell you not to put questions in your queries. Don't do that. Some people can put questions in their query and get an agent, but the vast majority of people increase your chances. Don't do the things that might make an agent roll their eye. They are looking at so many works and they are just waiting for the one thing to be in your query letter that says, no, this isn't it. And it's not that they're evil. They got a lot, on their plate. And it's like, oh, they don't know what their story is about. They don't have the right elements in here. I can't spend my time working with this person. I mean, think about it. You want somebody who's working with you to be put together, put yourself together, put your best foot forward.
Okay, so I have one last question that we can probably save for the end. So I want to open it up to the group. If you didn't throw it in the chat, or if you didn't and I somehow missed it, y'all go ahead. You come off mute and ask anything you want to ask.
I have a question. Melissa.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Janice. You mentioned that it was very helpful for you to do these workday writers workshops. Can you recommend specific workshops that you?
Yeah, I put the link here. Let me grab it off where did I put that? Here it is. So this is, there are others out there. Any association, I recommend becoming a part of the association of the genre that you're working with. They will do things like this.
So you're saying that they have an association for every genre?
Hold on one second. I just lost can you still see me?
Yes, I can. Can you see me?
I've lost the, how bizarre. I've lost Zoom. How strange.
Well, that's okay. Just if you could just verbally tell me, just
it's called Writing Day Workshops. Like if you Google Writing Day Workshops.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Yeah,
so if
that is it.
Writers Day Workshops.
Yes,
it should come up for me.
Yes, it will.
Okay, and off the top of your head, is there any of them that seem better than others? Do you remember?
No, if you look, they'll show you. all the list of every conference that they have going on, whether it's online or whether it is in person. And so then they will, you can look on there and see, and within that conference, they'll have a list of agents, and you just look at their bio. So if their bio looked like something that they would represent you, then pitch to them.
Okay. The main thing is that I just go to Writers Day workshops, and then I can just get that information straight up.
Yes.
Okay. And then I'll just go further and get the information on the detail of the agents. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Um,
I've lost my screen. I don't know what I did, what I clicked, but I can't see you guys anymore. But I'm just going to keep going because you can still see and hear me. It's the weirdest
Can't
thing.
see us.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing. Like the Zoom screen is gone. I have no idea how to get it back.
So we can like make funny faces at you now.
You can.
We
you
can see you. What if you're writing crosses genres? Let's say it's romance and historical fiction. What do you do?
Look at I would say, look at the comp titles. What are you closest to? And go for that. But also my genre, I thought I had written a romance, but turns out I wrote a women's fiction novel, because romance has a genre convention where you have to have a happily ever after. My novel didn't have a happily ever after. Well, it does, but it's not in the way that people typically thought it was. So I started pitching romance, and then I realized it was women's fiction. So I started going towards women's fiction. But so I would say whichever one most closely ties into your work, go with that one, but don't discount the editors or the agents who might also do that other genre that you're working with, because there were some that said women's fiction with romantic components in it. So I would go after those. You'll get a feel on the agent's profile. That's what takes so long, is you have to do that research to find out exactly what they're looking for, because they'll tell you if they want those things, or you might get a feel that that's what they want based on who they represent, or based on what you see on their profile. You might think, well, they don't necessarily request what I've got, but they say enough that makes me think they might be interested. And in that case, go for it. Does that answer your question, Lenore?
Yes, thank you.
Someone asked, are you free to self-publish now that you have an agent?
So
I guess if you could still self-publish, I guess.
I would have to, I think, sever my relationship with my agent. So yeah, you can still do anything. I can't just have the agent and then self-publish, because I've made a deal with her. I've signed a contract. I haven't paid her anything because she's there. The agency, I signed with the agency. That's another thing that you might look at, is when you sign with somebody, if you're signing with the agent or with the agency. I love what I have, because, I mean, God forbid, I hope this doesn't happen, but if Ariana ever went anywhere, I would still be a client of JV in LA. That I feel like that's a nice thing. But say for instance, down the line, she can't sell any of my novels, whether she's like, I don't really think this is going to work out, or I'm like, hey, I don't think this is working out. We can sever that relationship. It's not binding. And then I can do what I want. But no, I can't just self-publish now that I have an agent.
Okay. Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
What you said about being signed to the agent or the agency. I had an experience in New York when I signed with a music publisher. A particular person brought me in and was pitching my songs. He left and went to another company, and I had nobody left to pitch my songs.
Yeah.
In that particular company, so that can happen.
Yeah. I've heard other stories like that with agents, where the agent just vanishes, and then you don't have anybody working for you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Melissa,
So, question. Do you have performance in your contract with your agent? Do you have performance requirements for the contract that say that, you know, she needs to submit this many times or do these kinds of actions? And if she doesn't, then if she just let your manuscript sit in the background while she's selling something she likes better, can you pull the contract?
I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but if either, it would be, it's same as I was saying before, if that would be kind of like, this isn't a good fit type of a thing, then you can still sever that. I mean, like, I don't feel like you're giving me the attention. I don't feel like you're the right agent for me. So I think you could do that kind of a thing. Because it's not like it's an agreement more than it is a contract, a binding one. I don't know how it is everywhere, but I feel like in most agent author relationships, it's a two-way street. And if one of you is not happy, then the relationship is over. And I think depending on the agent, it's probably no hard feelings.
Melissa,
Yes.
tell me, roughly, what would be a reasonable time frame to give an agent to sell your work? Or I know it varies, but
Yeah.
You mean after you actually have signed a contract with the agent and then them selling your novel to get published? Is that what you mean?
right, just what would
Okay.
be a reasonable amount of time to give them in order to pitch it?
I think it depends on your relationship with the agent, because if you just hand them one novel and then you don't hear anything back from them, or they're not, you know, communicative with you, then that's kind of a sign. But if then you might want to pull your book away from them after 6 months. I don't know. So I think it varies. But say that agent, you watch them hustling your manuscript for a year or, you know, 18 months. I've heard that it can take 18 months. And I'm not an expert on that part, so I wouldn't want to tell you, hey, pull your book after this. But if they've been hustling your manuscript and they've been working with you this whole time, in an 18-month period, you should have another novel, right? If you're trying to do this as a career, then that's when you pitch your other novel and say, okay, you decide as a team, let's pull this. We're not going to submit it anymore. And let's go with this other project that we've been working on. I feel like that's the kind of relationship, thinking less of how long am I going to give you and more of like, let's see how long this takes. And then when you both come to that time where you're like, this isn't going to go anywhere, it's obvious that this isn't the right time for this manuscript, then you can move on to something else. Now, another story that I've heard, an author gets an agent, the agent can't sell their manuscript at the time, they move on to something else. Maybe they sell the next one, maybe they don't, but then they find later, they realize in some sort of business capacity, hey, that manuscript we couldn't sell, it looks like we might could sell it now. And then they pitch it and they sell it then, you know, and maybe that's 2 or 3 years down the road. So I've heard all those stories. Just because they don't sell it right now might not mean that they can't sell it ever. If that's kind of a roundabout question. I don't think there's one like solid timeline where you can say, this is when we pull it.
But when you sign a contract, an agreement with them, don't you give them a certain amount of time, or is it just open-ended?
Every agency is probably different. Mine is open-ended.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that average is between 18 months and 2 years if they sell it and then, you know, actually having a release date and everything. So kind of like Melissa touched on already, is you do actually have to have the patience.
Yeah.
But I like also what you said about having other books ready. Like, don't just stop writing because you're waiting to get this one book published. Like, keep going, because like you said, you could they might can pitch another novel that you have.
Yes, I was talking to an author at a conference, and I did not know this. She's published multiple books, and I love her books. And I found out recently that her first novel flopped. I feel like that's a harsh word, but it didn't sell. Her agent couldn't sell it. They worked for a long time, but she had that something else in the work. They were able to sell that second one. So that's such a great feeling, it's that mindset of now that getting the agent is the hardest thing. Well, I don't know if it's the hardest thing. I've heard some people say that, but you have opportunity within that agent. Don't let it go to waste. Write something else. Perhaps that second thing is it. Maybe the other thing comes later, or maybe that was just the thing that you used for growth to get your debut out, and really your debut is your third novel that you wrote.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? Oh wait, we got one. Hold on. So if your novels fall into different genres, will your current agent pitch all of them?
That depends upon the agent. So if you write 2 books and you have 2 books ready to go and it's within the same genre, they're probably not going to pitch it. If your agent, my agent will do thrillers and romance. So if I give her a thriller, she might actually pitch it at the same time we've got a women's fiction or romance novel out there. So it depends upon the agent. Some agents are genre specific. They know the editors within sci-fi fantasy, and they're not going to do anything else outside of that. So you try to pitch them a random romance when they've been working on your sci-fi fantasy, they're not going to know who to pitch it to. They haven't developed the relationships with the editors in the publishing houses, so they might not know who to give it to. So it depends upon the agent and what relationships they've cultivated with editors and different editors.
So if you have another book in a different genre that the agent you've signed with does not pitch, are you free to get another agent for that particular book?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure about that. I don't know 100% about that one. If you can get a second agent for that genre, it makes sense that you might be able to, but I think that would be a conversation you'd have to talk with your agent. You'd have to have a conversation with your agent. I know in looking, watching one of the lectures with agents and saying what they recommended. If you wrote in different genres, like, do you need to worry about that? And the answer came back with, don't worry about the next novel that you're going to pitch. Don't worry if your agent may or may not cover that genre. Think about the one you're in right now and go with that one, because you just never know. And then cross that bridge down the line. Because I mean, agents vary so much, just like, writing is so subjective. One agent might love your work, another agent might not like it, just like we like different things as people. They're going to do different things and be okay with different things. So I think that's another agent conversation where you have that open relationship. I think it's important to have a relationship where you don't feel scared asking all the questions. If I have a question, I feel perfectly comfortable talking to Ariana about it.
Cool.
Melissa, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're good. I was going to ask if there was any more.
Okay. Can you give me a resource that's real streamlined that I could go specifically to agents in my particular genre that I'm writing in? Is there, instead of having to sort through everything, is there some sort of resource to do that with?
Yeah, Query Tracker. I don't know if Duotrope and Publishers Marketplace does it. I'm almost positive that they have to. You can sort by genre. So you just, whatever you're writing, romance, click the little tab that you want to see romance authors or romance agents that are representing romance, and it'll populate with a list of agents that are.
It's on Duotrope and also on Query Tracker.
I know it's on Query Tracker because that's what I used, and I used the free version, but I can't imagine that. I mean, Publishers Marketplace is like the thing that they've got to have that too. So any of those websites, go there, they'll
And-
have a search bar or a click box or something that says, gives you a list of any sort of genre you can imagine. And you check that box and it'll only show those
Okay.
genres listed in the agent profile.
In the Twitter reference that you gave, what was that again? I didn't write that down.
They've stopped doing what was that called? PitMad. They used to do PitMad, but that closed. There are other smaller places that are now doing things like that. Like there's like diverse div pit, I think, where it's like authors or characters that are diverse. You can pitch there but any of you can look and see which pitch fest is going on. There are probably all kinds, and I don't know. They used to have a generic one where you could pitch anything and then you would just title it. You'd put a little hashtag and based on your genre, and then the agent would actually filter that themselves, so you didn't have to worry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add to that a little bit. Query Tracker is the better one of those two. I've done the paid version of that one, also done the paid version of Publishers Marketplace.
Have you?
And for Publishers Marketplace to be the be all end all, it was not that great.
Well, I'm glad to know
okay.
that. I loved Query
Yes.
Tracker too.
Query trackers are so now keep in mind you still have to do your due diligence. Like all it's
Yeah.
giving you is a list of names and the genres they represent.
Yeah.
Query
And they
tracker is
s-
good about if the information is not up to date, you can email them and they'll take it down. So for instance, if you only want to show those that are currently accepting new clients or whatever, it will
Mhm.
filter that. But sometimes, it was updated 6 months ago. So that
Yeah.
agent is no longer accepting new clients. So then you just have to email them and let them know, and they'll update and say, hey, they're closed to queries right now.
So you think
Um,
the Query Tracker is the best, April?
I do. That's
Okay.
my personal preference. Publishers Marketplace. If you ever run into anybody who works there and they want my feedback, just send them my way, because I was very disappointed with given what they like. You're paying for this, and this is all I'm getting.
Oh
So
man, that's
they're
good
they're
to
really
know.
good about publishing news though. So if you're looking at like who recently signed to what agency,
Yeah.
what was sold to what publisher, they're good about that.
Mhm.
As far as actually finding an agent, I don't recommend it.
No,
for that.
okay, that's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm glad to know that. Yeah.
Um,
I love doing things on, that are inexpensive and they still work, and Query Tracker worked for me beautifully.
Right. Because like I said, you still have to do the research anyway.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Sorry. Any other questions? Anybody? Melissa, any closing comments, advice, anything?
All of my tabs went away. Let's see if I had anything else on here. This has been a lot of fun. I know I've talked a lot, but if I can spare people from having to go through some of the things that I went through, it's worth it. I've learned a lot because I've been doing this for a long time at this point. Let's see if I wrote anything else down. Oh, hey, you're back.
So while she's doing that, if we want to come off mute and just give her a round of applause for her
Oh,
time and advice.
thank you guys.
Thank you so much. It
Oh,
was
I'm
very
so
good. Very good.
good.
It was
I'm
really,
so
really
glad.
great. I learned a lot.
Good. That makes me really happy. I'm glad I got to come for the end. Oh, one thing I will say is that when you're looking at a book as a product, and this was hard for me, especially as an introvert, is part of the whole process of getting a book published is marketing yourself and your book. I did not want to do that. In social media, all that stuff. One of the biggest things that I keep hearing is the best way to for an author to sell their manuscript and like cultivate a relationship with people that's real is doing a newsletter. I put that up there, and don't be afraid to let you're writing a book, and this whole thing is people are going to read that book. You want them to read that book. You're not writing it unless you're doing it just for yourself or for your family. But if you are writing a book to get it published, then you want people to read it, and they're not going to read it unless they know about it. You've got to get over being shy of letting people know that you have a product, because they can enjoy it. So when I've noticed this so much, and I've had to get over this myself, is it's okay to let people know that you are on social media. It's okay to ask them to follow you. It's okay for them to sign up, to ask them for you to sign up for their newsletter. It's okay to let them know that you're writing a book and to push it. Don't be obnoxious about it. But I think that was a huge thing for me, is getting over the fact of like, I wrote a book, but I'm not going to share about it because I'm embarrassed and I'm shy. And that's not going to get you anywhere. You've got to tell people about it. You've got to be proud of what you're putting out there, because you can do it, and you should have confidence in yourself to do it.
Okay.
And you should sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to say that. You
I-
definitely should. I almost forgot to say that in talking about the newsletter. You
Throw
should
the
definitely do
link
it.
in the chat.
Okay, I have a question and a comment.
Yes.
I don't like Facebook. To me, it's a big waste of time. I don't do any of that stuff at all. When something good happens in my songwriting career, I never put it up on Facebook. I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
I was under the impression that you only had to do blogs and newsletters and stuff like that when you self-publish, to direct people to your book. But if you've got an agent who is working for you, I was under the impression there's no need for any of that.
Not
That is
anymore.
a huge misconception. Huge misconception. I'm so glad you brought that up, because when you are self-published, you think, okay, I have to do everything myself. But when you are traditionally published, you think, well, my editors, the publishing house, they're going to take care of everything. They take care of some things, but it is on you these days to market yourself. And that is why I said what I did there about the newsletter and everything. I will say this though, that I keep hearing over and over again, social media doesn't really sell books. As an author, like, you can sell other people's books for them, on social media. Like, there are bookstagrammers and TikTokers who, if they push your book, it'll get bought. But if you're out there pushing your book, it's probably a waste of your time. Not saying you don't need to be on social media, but there are a lot of people who are successful that are not on social media. I have upped my social media game, but that's exposure so that people have heard my name. And ultimately, I'm pushing them to my newsletter. I'm pushing them to my email list, because I have developed, like I said, truly, they say this, that it's the best way for an author to cultivate an audience. But I have had so much fun with people emailing me back and forth, and I had such a better relationship with that email newsletter than anything I get on social media. So if you're going to do anything, do a newsletter. And there are ways aside from social media, that's a whole nother talk, that you can cultivate a newsletter audience. I haven't been the best at doing that, but that's my goal, is to actually cultivate a bigger audience and have a lead magnet and all that stuff. That's important, offer something. Give somebody something so that they'll sign up for you, and then you have that conversation. But no, you are responsible for marketing your own work.
Now, I would assume that's a bad word, but after the book is published, you help promote it. But while your agent is looking for a publisher to promote it?
Yeah, the biggest recommendation that I hear over and over and over again is you start promoting yourself and your book before it is ever written. So you are behind if you start marketing your book when it gets published. You're already behind. So the time starts now before you even have words on the page, like getting yourself out there. And that was when I first heard that, I thought, that's ridiculous. Like, what am I gonna tell people about? What am I gonna write about? It's getting to know you. When people get to know you, then they want to go get your book. They're not, you don't sell your book, you sell yourself. And then people buy your book. But yeah, that's one of the things, the misconceptions of the publishing industry is that, one, if you go with a big publisher or independent even, which is still, you know, a great valid way. There's so many ways of publishing your work out there, but we're just kind of talking about agents, the agent path today. But you're responsible for marketing. They will do a little bit of it, but even the big guys, they do a little, and then once that like release time is up, you're on your own. But even before that, like, get it in there, because one of the biggest things that tells the, I just put this in my newsletter this past week, and I don't have it up on my blog, or you could see it, but I'm behind on everything. But I what was I saying? I lost my whole train of thought.
About getting people to come to get your newsletter. About how you're pushing the newsletter, get people to
How
sign
do
up.
you start a newsletter? Whom do you inform? And do you do it through email? I mean, do you start with a
Yes.
group of people you know?
Well, before I go with that, let me tell you that the one of the biggest things that you can do for your book is actually before it releases, you hype it up. Like you've got a book deal, it is going to come out, but that pre-release, pre-orders are huge for an author, and it tells the retailers, the libraries, and all that stuff how many books they should shelve, how many of your books, how popular your book's going to be. So the more hype you get on the front end builds your excitement up, and you become more of a hot commodity. If you do it after your book is already published, then the sales, you don't have as much wind in your sales. So that kind of goes for pushing your work ahead of time. But what did you ask next? I wanted to answer that one because that was where I was going.
Newsletter.
Oh,
How
a
do you
newsletter.
start a
Yeah,
newsletter?
that's like a whole like, people can spend whole talks on that. But when you start a newsletter, you basically you have to have a platform that will mail to a bunch of people at one time, and then you just start subscribing to author newsletters. That's what I would recommend to see how it's done. Is if you'll see when it comes. I do a weekly newsletter. Some people do daily newsletters, but a lot of authors will do monthly because they can't sustain a weekly one. The more you engage with your audience, the better. But anyway, how you start one is the way I started was asking friends and family. I mean, friends and family are like the worst at like supporting you. It's usually the strangers that support you the best, but that's where you're most comfortable to be like, hey. So I would say I hate doing it so much. I hate so much asking people to like be on my newsletter. I'm slowly getting over that, but in the beginning I would just ask, and I'd be like, I'm doing a newsletter because one day I want to publish a book, and hey, can I put your name on my list? So it was kind of that kind of a thing where I was really shy about it. But yeah, you just start texting people and be like, hey, I have a newsletter. Don't put anybody on your email list without their approval. That's one thing. But if you look at my website, I'll say, oh, thank you, Jeannie. I will say, like, you're free to unsubscribe at any time, but if you want this free short story, you got to sign up for my email list. I've got a writer thing I'm going to put out eventually when I ever have enough time, that if you want this like to-do list, this author to-do list, then you got to sign up for my email list. But it's very apparent in everything that you do. Like, you're going to get a weekly email from me, and you can unsubscribe if you want to. That's a big thing, is don't put anybody on your email list without their consent. And then you start out by asking friends and family, people that you know, other authors. And then you find your audience, and you go to where your audience is, and you start letting them know that you have a newsletter. And it takes multiple times people seeing that for them to ever sign up, for them to ever purchase anything. So that's why you have to keep repeating it, because people are shy to do anything like that. But putting yourself out there. And then there are websites. Book Funnel is one I just recently discovered. That's how I distribute my short story lead magnet for free. BookFunnel, you can collaborate with other people who have an email list so that you get exposure. The BookFunnel, there's a couple others. I'm not prepared with that information. Oh, Romancing the Beat was the other
Romancing
writing
the
resource.
what?
I couldn't find it. Romancing the Beat. That's if you're writing romance. I couldn't remember it earlier, but
Beat, B-E-A-T?
yeah.
How do I sign up for your newsletter?
She put the link in the chat, but I will, I'll send it out when I send out the link to the recording as well.
Okay.
Thank you. And it will come with a free short story, which I have, which an audio version as well. I did an audio of it too. Let's see. I wanted, oh, you said, what is your website and email address? I'll give that to April too. It's on the, in that newsletter. If you click on that, then it takes you to the newsletter, but you can see my website from there too. It's melissacollings.com.
Oh,
I feel
All
like I
right.
have talked so much. I hope I haven't like talked your face off.
no,
No.
you've been fine. Totally fine. Really.
You're
It's
gonna-
been helpful. It's been a joy. Go ahead, Ed.
Illuminating. Very, you know, all this stuff that I hate to do.
Yes, yes.
So are you gonna send us a set of links or put it on the Google Sheet for the group to the different resources you mentioned?
I
You know,
can.
and all
I
this
can.
other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, it-
April, didn't you say you were doing that? You were going to send?
No, he's talking about something separate. He's talking about just all the resources that she mentioned and putting them in. So for what started as the NaNoWriMo group, stop. Let's stop the recording first.
Because somebody's not here.
Well, thank you so much.